If you ever visit Cuyahoga Valley National Park, chances are you've probably come across these yellow buildings along Vaughan Road. I, like many others, have wondered what these buildings are. While they today function as the National Park's headquarters, their original use was for an abandoned paper mill's company town. The Jaite Paper Mill operated for nearly 8 decades and was served by the Ohio and Erie Canal and a railroad spur. So come join me as we discover the site's history and explore what remains of the mill, company town, and rail line. According to the Centennial History of Summit County, the Jaite Mill was considered one of the most important business enterprises in this section of Summit County. Much of the company's success can be attributed to its founder, Charles H. Jaite. Charles was born in Germany in 1859 before he and his parents immigrated to Cleveland in 1860. At the age of 13, he went to work at a local paper mill and learned to master every detail of the business. In 1902, after climbing the ranks, Jaite became president of the Standard Bag and Paper Company and vice president of the Cleveland Paper Company. These two firms were eventually consolidated with the Akron Paper Company in 1903, forming the Cleveland-Akron Paper Company. Charles Jaite was put in charge of managing the company's mill in the village of Boston. Their plant was located on the west side of the Cuyahoga River and consisted of housing and a general store for employees. Though his time there didn't last long. In July of 1905, Jaite resigned from his positions at the company. Although he wasn't leaving the paper business, he and his brothers and in-laws founded the Jaite Company on September 18, 1905. The group located and purchased 22.76 acres in Sagamore Hills Township, nestled at the border of Cuyahoga and Summit counties, about a half-mile north from the Cleveland-Akron paper mill. Immediately thereafter, a 2-story plant was built, measuring 50 feet by 200 feet. The machine room was on the first floor, and the bag factory was on the second floor. It also had a boiler and engine room, a bleach room, an office, and a warehouse. As production increased, more land was acquired, and the factory was expanded to roughly 155,000 square feet. The Jaite Company manufactured paper and paper bags for products like cement, plaster, flour, feed, and lime. In later years, they made fertilizer bags and bread sacks. The site was perfectly situated for making paper as it was practically surrounded by fresh water. On one side is the Cuyahoga River, and on the opposite is Brandywine Creek and the Ohio and Erie Canal. In addition, they drilled 5 gas wells and located an artisan well that also supplied water. The mill originally produced its own paper pulp made from rags and wood and manufactured paper using a cylinder machine. In 1926 and 1927, they converted these machines to the four-denier process. In its early days, the plant was able to produce 8 tons of paper per day. By its heyday in the 1920s and 1930s, the company had become the 11th largest multi-wall paper producer in the nation. To bring in the needed raw materials and export finished products, they utilized the 308-mile-long Ohio and Erie Canal and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's 76-mile C-V branch that extended between Cleveland and Zorville. This required a short railroad spur to be built from the B&O's main line at milepost 56 and a 138-foot-long bridge carrying it to the other side of the Cuyahoga River. One aspect that Charles Jaite incorporated from his time at the Cleveland-Akron Bag Company was establishing a company town for its employees. Property along Riverview Road was purchased in 1906, where 5 2-story houses were built. In 1917, 4 additional single-family houses were built along Vaughan Road. The unincorporated hamlet additionally had a combination workers' house, general store, and post office named Jaite. Unlike a typical company town where workers were paid with company-issued scrips in lieu of real money, Jaite didn't have this. In fact, employees weren't even forced to live in the firm's dwellings if they chose. Those who lived in other surrounding communities like Brecksville, Boston, and Peninsula could commute to the B&O Railroad's Jaite stop. In a 1918 Ohio manufacturer directory, it shows there were 214 people employed at the mill. During the Great Depression, This figure rose to nearly 250 people. Most of these employees were Polish immigrants, and a third of them were women. Their jobs mainly consisted of sewing bindings to the ends of finished bags and performing clerical duties.
Pretty much everybody worked down at the Jaite Company during the 30s and maybe even before that. And most of our family from time to time worked down there. And like I said, most everybody in Peninsula and Boston, it was the one place near home that you could go to work. I even worked there for a while as a secretary. It was a one-girl office, and it was great. And of course, I knew practically all the people, so it was almost like, a little bit of home.
By the end of World War II, the privately owned Jaite Company was finding it increasingly difficult to compete with larger mills, mostly in the South. In 1951, the Jaite family decided to sell the business to the New York-based National Container Corporation. In 1956, National Container merged with Owens, Illinois Incorporation, who then assumed ownership of the property. In 1967, the Tecumseh Corrugated Box Company bought the property. Tecumseh separated the plant into two different divisions. The Jaite Mill portion continued making paper rolls, and the bag factory, previously closed in 1958, instead made corrugated boxes from this paper. On December 27, 1974, the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area, later made a national park in 2000, was formed to preserve and acquire 32,000 acres between Independence and Akron. Realizing the site's historical significance, the park listed the Jaite Mill Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places in 1979. Acquisition of the property was to have happened in 1980, however, this stalled due to the lack of allocated government funds, and Tecumseh was unwilling to piecemeal the land off. During this time of uncertainty, the company was experiencing a high turnover rate, defective products, and unfavorable contracts with current and prospective customers. By 1983, an agreement was finally reached with the national park, and the Jaite paper mill fell silent on December 14, 1984. The park considered several plans for the former mill, including leasing the site for adaptive reuse through the Historic Leasing Program. Originally, in 1985, the Cuyahoga Valley Line, today's Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, moved its headquarters into the building's office. At one point, there were also talks of making the site like the Steamtown National Historic Site, containing space to store and maintain their locomotives and rolling stock, and incorporating observation decks for guests. This never happened, as the bridge over the river would have been too costly to replace. In 1988, Sports Enterprise Incorporated envisioned converting it into the largest indoor horseshoe pitching complex in the nation. The plan consisted of a restaurant, snack bar, shops, conference rooms, a lounge, and a Horseshoe Hall of Fame museum. Ultimately, any plans for reusing the building ended in arson on October 2, 1992. The fire left the mill a hazard with unsecured walls and roofs, exposed asbestos, and potential hazardous waste sites. In 2006, after years of struggling to obtain the necessary funding for demolition, the entire structure finally met the wrecking ball. So what exactly remains of the Jaite Mill Historic District? All 5 of the company dwellings and general store/post office still stand along Vaughan Road. Only 2 of the 5 houses on Riverview Road are left, as the 3 other ones were destroyed in the fire. The Jaite Railroad passenger and freight depots survive across the street from the company houses on Vaughan Road. The passenger depot was built in 1903 and was originally named Vaughan after a farmer who donated land through his property to the railroad. Jaite was a flag stop, meaning passengers had to request for the train to stop here. In 1932, the station was designated as a Midway Point agency office governing movements for trains at South Park, Alexanders, Brecksville, Boston Mill, Peninsula, and Boston stations.
I hired out February 20th of 1957 as a telegraph operator and an agent. Worked most of northeastern Ohio. But Jaite, first I went there was in April of 1958. I posted there for 4 days and then worked the guy's vacation for a week. Well, the Jaite Mill was basically the only reason they kept Jaite Station there. I don't know how many cars they handled a month, but it wasn't that many, maybe 4 or 5 cars a day. This quaint little station, just a little building with a potbelly stove and a desk and a old bench that probably come out of some passenger depot. It was a neat little place to work, and out in the country, nobody around, nobody seemed to bother you.
One neat artifact I brought with me today is this B&O train order form, which was issued on March 18th, 1965 in this very building. I can only imagine how many years it's been since this piece of paper has returned to the building.
The office was later closed on June 30th, 1975, and the B&O CT&V branch between Independence and Akron was abandoned on December 3rd, 1984. Today, this part of the branch line is owned by the National Park and remains in service by the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. When the park bought the buildings, they were moved back from the right-of-way and the train order signal was removed. If you look closely, though, the concrete base for the signal is still there. Probably my favorite remnant in the historic district is the abandoned railroad spur that led to the paper mill. For years, I've heard from several friends about its existence, despite it being severed from the main line. After researching online and conferring with these friends, I was determined to get footage of it for this video. Alright, so here's the start of the Jaite Paper Mill spur, and as you can notice, there are some abandoned railroad ties still sticking out of the ballast here. To the right over here is the Baltimore and Ohio CT&V main line. We are looking south towards Akron, so let's start walking down the abandoned spur and take a look at what's left. So I'm a little ways in right now, and I've already found some rails on the ties here. It's very overgrown. I'm going to have to figure out a way to get through all this heavy brush to continue down the spur. So let me figure that out and I will be back shortly. Finally found my way through. Here's the B&O main line over here. And coming out of this thick brush over here is the rails. I don't know if you can see it in this view. I'm going to turn around here and you can get a better view of the tracks. Here they are right here. And so let's continue forward. I thought at first you could hike on the old spur directly, but I quickly discovered the informal trail you have to take at times zigzags back and forth from either side of the tracks. Besides the thickly overgrown brush, there wasn't much of anything scenic to see along the way. We're about halfway there now to the Bridge 451-1, which crossed over the Cuyahoga River to the Jaite Paper Mill. Still trying to get through the brush. It's not that bad, but it's manageable. And again, I will update you once I get closer. As you can see, I've made it to the bridge. This is B&O's Bridge 451-1. It is a Pratt through truss design. The exact year that it was built is not known. The National Park estimates it to have been built around the year 1907 to 1909. Most of the ties on the bridge are missing, and the ones that are still left are severely rotting. On the other side of the bridge is where the Jaite Paper Mill would have been. That area is fenced off. The mill no longer stands, but there is a couple remnants left from the mill that you can see. I am definitely not going to be walking across this bridge. There's another way to access where the mill site is on the Ohio and Erie Canal Towpath Trail, and once I get over there, I will show you what is left. The only items that remain from the paper mill are the four-denier machine and the building's concrete foundation. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the machine when I walked the towpath. The plan is now to restore the site to its natural habitat,